Okay. Oh, we are loud. Hello. Um, today, hello everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. Let me just make sure real quick. Mm-mm-mm. Nope. All right. Well, I'm just gonna assume that you guys can hear me. So, welcome back. It's Mental Health Monday. Thanks for tuning in. Today we are going to be talking about relationships and just how important they are. We're going to talk about how sometimes they can be detrimental and just a little bit about everything about relationships. But again, before we start, I just want to say that I'm not a professional by any means. I'm currently studying to get my master's in clinical counseling, where then I will take about 2 years to work towards my license to become a LPC, which is a licensed professional counselor. At that point, I will be able to practice therapies. I mean, I'll be doing it all the way up until then, but um, yeah, I'll be able to do therapy and have my own private practice and a bunch of other different stuff. But so whatever you hear here, take with a grain of salt and do your own research and learn and just kind of try to expand your knowledge as much as you can because that's all we really can do on this planet. So, but without further ado, let's talk a little bit about relationships. Um, Relationships. We hear about people having both positive and negative all the time. Obviously, everyone wants to have a good and positive relationship, but there are certain attributes and certain things that occur that kind of make some relationships negative, whether it be toxic, whether it be behavioral, whether it be emotional, psychological, or sometimes unfortunately physical. And we see a lot of those problems both in the counseling field when we have relationship counseling. There's a entire pretty much an entire sector focused on marriage and relationships when it comes to marriage and family therapy. That's something that I think I eventually want to kind of get into. I think I want to become licensed in that part too. So that's something that's intrigued me, and I think it's really interesting. But yeah, relationships. I mean, whether it be a sibling relationship, a parental relationship, a regular just friendship relationship, we have so many. And as human beings, we are social creatures. We want to create bonds and connect with others. We are not beings that would kind of be isolated, or we're not very idealized or focused on becoming lone wolves or anything. That's not a very humanistic trait. We tend to be There are certain things obviously that kind of align with like individualistic and collectivistic, but that kind of has to focus on certain paradigms and dynamics that kind of are integrated in certain perspectives, but that's not really kind of what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like when it comes to relationships that we do not stray away from them. Humans tend to strive towards one another and build communities, and we see that, I mean, everywhere throughout the world. We have so many people in so many different countries, and we see kind of big groupings of areas. In certain areas we like cities, towns, and all that stuff, and that kind of stems all the way back from when humans were just becoming organized and kind of creating relationships with one another, bonds that they could trust with one another. And like, again, we learn in counseling that um was it Maslow's eight? No, not Maslow's. Yeah, there's these eight stages, Maslow's developmental stages, and the first one we talk about is trust versus mistrust. And that's one of the first things we learn is in the developmental state as humans is whether or not we can trust someone else. And if that's like the first step. And if you learn mistrust at such a young age, it can detrimentally, like, if you go look at some articles and research, it shows that just like being able to create relationships and maintain relationships down the road is significantly influenced on your ability, or any problems with the first step in the developmental um, stages. First, was it Maslow? Oh, Erickson. I always get those two mixed up. So it's Erickson's, not 8 stages of development. But yeah, trust versus mistrust. That's a huge one. I mean, trusting another human being. I mean, there are some bad people out there. Some people that you're gonna place your trust in, and they're gonna abuse that. And again, that comes down to the relationships and understanding about what you want to get out from it and what you put into it and kind of how you can live symbiotically, or if someone kind of becomes like oh, what's it called, not a oh, I'm drawing a blank. Regardless though, but that's just something that we focus on, we tend to learn about, we learn about ourselves. But a lot of the way we shape our relationships and thoughts regarding relationships is something that we learn when we're children. We are witnessing our relationships as we grow, and we tend to model a lot of the relationships we see as how we will practice relationships down the road, whether it's good or bad. We that is if it's the first inclination or first experience with a relationship, that tends to set a baseline. And unfortunately, if the first one's bad, or if it's constantly bad, and and you see that as such a um, mendable child or teenager, that you're gonna tend to base your future relationships on that, and that's going to be problematic. It's going to be because there's certain aspects that we get from each relationship that we may want to better, and sometimes carrying that on to the next relationship is difficult, especially when you're not thinking about what caused that, what created those problems, what allowed for those problems to grow. And it's just each individual's duty to really learn as much as they can about themselves, so that way they are aware of any of the baggage or any of the bad experiences that they've had in relationships doesn't come in and influence or create negativity in the next one, whether it be romantic or friendship or anything. Knowing what baggage you have and what it can bring to a relationship, because it can bring some good things, wanting to make sure that you're able to trust somebody after having a relationship that you weren't able to trust somebody. It's a way that your body is trying to protect itself and kind of maintain a relationship where you aren't manipulated or used by someone else. And sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it can be a defense mechanism. And again, relationships are difficult because they have to do with other people, and if communication and respect and understanding isn't there, like those main three pillars, it's going to be really difficult to maintain certain relationships, or there's going to be more of a give or more of a take, and not a kind of equal transference of um, whatever. So that's just kind of a basic overview of knowing that a lot of our relationships that we tend to base off is something that we've seen when we were younger. I believe a lot of the things we see and experiences, like our past experiences, kind of influence, and we integrate those influences and experiences into the relationships that we have now. So if you've only ever known negative relationships, you're most likely going to take a lot of that and bring it into your relationships. And they may be negative, even though you don't realize they're negative. There's a bunch of aspects that we constantly have to ask ourselves and really focus on about who we are as people and what kind of values and ideas when it comes to relationships and bring to the table. Um, One of the main things I love to talk about when talking about relationships is the importance of the longest relationship you have on this planet. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you guys to take a second, think about it, and then I'll explain kind of what I'm getting at. So, what is the longest and most important relationship that you have throughout your entire life? Okay. If you thought of your mom, your dad, your brother, your friend Sally, your friend Eric, um, that's wrong. Although those may be important to you and may be telling in some aspect as to why you immediately thought of that, the most important relationship you have is with yourself. And that is such a moving and important thing to always remember, because you're going to spend the most time with yourself. And if you don't have a positive relationship with yourself, that's already putting you at a disadvantage to have positive and lasting relationships with others. And this can be attributed to many different things. There's many different factors that go into possibly having a negative relationship with yourself. But if you don't love yourself or practice self-love or know your self-worth and put a lot of your happiness and other emotions of being and worth into others, and your self-worth is only shown when you're in relationships, that is a key indicator to kind of tell you it's time to reflect on what your relationship is with yourself, because I know it's a hard and difficult conversation to have that. Um, but by having that and learning more about yourself, it's just going to create a better relationship. You should never ever put your happiness and emotions or love, or and like you're not good, your emotions that produce dopamine should never be dependent on others. Now, I'm not saying others can't help you feel good or be happy, but I'm saying they should never depend on another person, because if that person is to leave or perhaps pass away, and it's very, very sad to think about, but then part of you, if it's so ingrained that that person was pretty much what you depended on to be happy and they're no longer there, it is very difficult to kind of mend that part of the relationship within yourself. You are your own autonomous being, and you are worth it. You're worth everything. You have love. You have you can produce love for yourself when maybe nobody else can. And that's just a very powerful and important thing when it comes to knowing the relationship within yourself. Again, it's okay for people to make you happy, but they can't be entirely dependent on others. That's all I'm trying to say. And especially with um, some toxic relationships, we tend to see a lot of um, one-sided parties putting a lot of their dependence on and happiness on the others. So they're more hesitant to kind of like walk away from the toxic relationship, because their happiness is so ingrained and so like just like I said, just ingrained into that relationship as to this is what creates happiness. If I don't have this, I will not have happiness. And relationships can produce happiness, but it's not, again, the relationship, it does should not your happiness should not depend on the relationship. Um, but again, just working with yourself and learning to love yourself, whether it's daily affirmations or seeing a therapist, that's a very important one that can kind of help you learn to build and bridge the gap between the relationship with you and yourself. Because we all have parts about ourselves that we don't like, and that's perfectly fine. But that's also understanding part of the relationship that you have with yourself. It's the parts that you may not enjoy, the parts you may not like, that shouldn't take away from anything from who you are as an autonomous being. And kind of realizing that and being okay that there are parts of myself that I may not be the biggest fan of, but still understanding that even though those parts that you don't really like, they're still a part of you, and that is okay. And maybe it's just an area to work on, because again, we're all people, we're all working on becoming better human beings, better for our friends, our loved ones, our family, our significant others, and most importantly ourselves. We should always be kind of learning and pushing ourselves to grow, whether it's internally, psychologically, emotionally, physically. Sometimes that can help. We tend to see there's some research that kind of promotes that growing like physically and like taking care of your body also helps with the relationship with yourself because you're practicing discipline and sometimes that tend to go with like daily affirmations. But again, just growing in one of those is always going to help bridge any gaps or any overpasses that might need mending when it comes to the relationship with yourself. So the relationship with yourself is the most important and longest relationship you have on this planet. um, so if you're going to spend the most time with yourself, you're going to spend the most time in this relationship. I think it's really worth your time to really focus and try to do your best to make it a positive one. Why not? Like, why not learn to love yourself? It may be hard, it may be difficult, and I'm not shaming anyone who may not love themselves right now, but if it's going to be so long, if we're stuck with ourselves, essentially stuck with ourselves, I say that lightly because it can be really a good thing too. Um, I think it's really worth it to work towards building and strengthening a relationship with ourselves because it's the more we learn about ourselves, the more we're able to take what we've learned and implement it into new relationships that we're creating or trying to maintain, and it just creates a more positive and kind of more self-aware outlook when it comes to relationships. So that's basically just the main point I wanted to talk about. Relationships, we're social creatures. We look to love and love having relationships because they benefit ourselves, again, physically, emotionally, psychologically. um, and yeah, so just make sure you're doing what you can to really strengthen whatever relationship you have with yourself, because that's going to in turn reflect and influence how you have relationships with others and kind of help create a positive and loving environment for yourself and others when it comes to having that relationship. So, I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Been another good Mental Health Monday. Um, Make sure you comment, like, subscribe. I have other videos posted throughout the week. And yeah, I want to thank you guys again for tuning in. So, I will see you guys next Monday. Thanks for watching.